50-year-old Mark Latunski is charged with the murder and mutilation of 25-year-old Kevin Bacon of Swartz Creek.
After Mr. Bacon was dead, did you remove part of his body, specifically his testicles?
Yes, I did.
Did you move those testicles to the kitchen?
Yes, I did.
19 years I've been at this job. This is the worst case I've ever seen.
They said horror had limits until these cannibals proved otherwise. One stalked and devoured a homeless man.
The body was found at the far end of that room. He was nude, and he was hanging from his feet by the ceiling of the basement.
One carved a sacrifice and ate what he offered. One turned on her own friend and tasted the wounds she made. They killed without hesitation. But when life sentences finally closed in, their confidence collapsed.
Although I do not want to die, I recognize that I deserve to for what I did.
Predators became pale, shaking witnesses to their own fate. These are the cannibals, and this is how they faced judgment. Jeffrey Dahmer. In February 1992 in Milwaukee, the courtroom fell silent as Jeffrey Dahmer stood to address the judge. For weeks, the world had heard the gruesome details of his crimes.
His killing field was Milwaukee, and he got away with murder for more than a decade. But how could any of this happen?
17 young men murdered, their bodies dismembered, and some consumed. But now, for the first time, Dahmer himself would speak. In his words, he did not want freedom. He did not deserve it either.
I didn't ever want freedom. Frankly, I wanted death for myself.
He also confessed to knowing his acts of violence were sick and evil, but in that moment, he was just a man like everyone else.
I knew I was sick or evil, or both. Now I believe I was sick.
The journey to that moment had been swift by legal standards. Arrested in July 1991 after a victim escaped, Jeffrey initially pleaded not guilty before changing his plea to guilty, but insane. The question wasn't whether he'd killed, because he'd confessed to everything.
I know how much harm I have caused. I tried to do the best I could after the arrest to make amends, but no matter what I did.
The question was whether he was legally sane when he did it. After deliberating for 5 hours, the jury ruled Jeffrey sane on February 15th. 2 days later came the sentencing, 15 consecutive life terms. But the sentence was not the only thing that shocked the court. It was Jeffrey's own reaction to his fate.
Count 15. Life imprisonment with parole eligibility to be 70 years after the inception of that sentence.
He accepted his sentence, even showing guilt with his admission to knowing the sick nature of his crime. Standing in a tan sport coat, he remained eerily calm and composed as each consecutive life term was read aloud.
Count 8, count 10, life imprisonment.
Yet what made his reaction striking was its apparent acceptance. His attorney announced no appeal would be filed. For a case that could have dragged on for years, it was over in 6 months. But was this remorse genuine, or the performance of a master manipulator? The world never got the chance to find out because Jeffrey was murdered by a fellow inmate while in prison.
Jeffrey Dahmer died. He was murdered in the prison where he was sent in 1991 for murdering 17 men and boys.
But although he got karma in prison, another criminal committed an equally heinous crime and paid the price. Mark David Latunski. Residents of Michigan looked forward to a festive season in December 2019, but the actions of one man turned a peaceful day into a terrible one. The horror had a modern twist, a dating app, a Christmas Eve disappearance, and a discovery that would haunt investigators for years. 25-year-old Kevin Bacon had met Mark Latunski on Grindr. Days later, police found Bacon's body hanging in Mark's basement.
Bacon's body was ultimately found in the basement of Mark Latunski's Bennington Township home after going missing.
Mark admitted to the police that he killed Bacon, stabbed him in the back, slit his throat, and ate part of his body. But there was something else missing. The death of Kevin and the trial revealed a pattern no one expected. There had been warnings before, of men who'd escaped Mark's home, one bleeding and terrified.
I broke out of the and I need a ride. I'm in Trump, and I met this guy on Bayou City, hit on me.
But no charges were filed at the time. Now, 3 years later, justice moved deliberately. The judge on the case called Kevin's death Mark Latunski's design, describing it as a crime of cold calculation.
The court finds that this is a crime of cold calculation.
During the trial, Mark pleaded guilty in September 2022, and by October the judge had determined first-degree murder. When sentencing day arrived, Mark declined to make any comment before his sentence, standing with his hands shackled and sporting a long beard.
Shackled and wearing an orange jumpsuit, Mark Latunski showing no emotion, learning his fate for the crime he admitted to.
But although his attorney claimed he was remorseful and truly regretted his actions, Mark himself remained silent.
We knew that we had an uphill battle just because of the statements that Mr. Latunski had made in his interrogation.
When it finally dropped, it echoed around the silent courtroom. Life without parole. The sentence was mandatory, inevitable. Yet what strikes observers still is Mark's silence. Was it shame, defiance, or the emptiness of a man who had nothing left to say? But unlike Mark, another criminal did not hide his emotions, and neither was he silent even in the face of justice. Andrei Chikatilo. For 6 months, the nation had watched as details emerged about the Rostov Ripper, a former teacher who'd murdered at least 52 people, mostly children over 12 years. But in October 1992, the trial of the century in the former Soviet Union reached its climax. Andrei Chikatilo sat in an iron cage in the courtroom, a position that was necessary because of his disruptive behavior. Throughout the trial, he'd alternated between boredom and mania, at one point exposing himself to the courtroom, insisting he wasn't a homosexual.
He was sick in the psychiatric or legal sense, certainly not insane.
But after reviewing the evidence and charges against him, Judge Leonid Akubzhanov sentenced Andrei to death plus 86 years imprisonment for 52 murders and 5 counts of assault. While the sentence was deserved, it was Andrei's spiraling reaction that sealed his fate. When the verdict was announced, the carefully maintained order in the courtroom was shattered. Andrei kicked his bench across his cage, shouting and spewing obscenities at everyone present. Guards gripped him tightly, restraining and even holding his throat to silence his outbursts. But he remained violent. Unlike the cold acceptance of Jeffrey or the silence of Mark, Andrei's reaction was pure rage. A final performance from a man who'd terrorized a region and caused pain to numerous families. His appeal for clemency would fail. For on February 14, 1994, he was executed with a single gunshot behind the right ear. But while he showed his violence in court, another murderer acted differently when karma called. Tyree Lincoln Smith. He heard voices in his head, but his actions were proof of more sinister influences and mental illnesses. In December 2011, Tyree Smith, driven by voices he believed were from God, killed Angel Gonzalez, a homeless man, with an axe, then ate his eyeball and part of his brain with sake in a cemetery.
Disturbing story out of Bridgeport where a man was killed with an axe, then his killer ate part of his body.
Fast forward to July 2013 in Connecticut, Tyree was still on trial. The case had elements that defied comprehension, but now it took a different path. A 3-judge panel found 35-year-old Tyree not guilty by reason of insanity, deliberating about an hour before reaching their verdict. But a man was dead, and justice needed to be served. The sentence? Commitment to a psychiatric hospital for up to 60 years.
Well, there are concerns in several Connecticut communities tonight after a man was granted conditional release from the state's psychiatric hospital.
But harsh as it was, the story of the homeless man-eater did not end there. But while his actions were clearly influenced by his insanity, a certain murderer owned up to his crime and his cannibalism. Jason Thornberg. In December 2024 in Fort Worth, Texas, the evidence was overwhelming. 3 people were murdered in a motel room over a week, their bodies dismembered and burned in a dumpster.
Here, and the remains were kept there as well until the suspect dumped them and set them on fire.
The murderer, Jason Thornberg, called them sacrifices to God. But these satanic sacrifices did not end there. Jason confessed to eating victim David Luaris's heart and engaging in necrophilia. Even worse, he also admitted to killing his roommate and girlfriend in previous years.
They also believe they have now identified 2 women who came to Thornberg's room in subsequent days.
During his trial, his defense team argued that fetal alcohol syndrome and mental illness explained his actions. But are those really enough to commit murder in the name of religion? For his crimes, Jason got the death sentence.
And the juror has answered the special issues, making it mandatory that your punishment be death.
But when the death sentence was announced, he sat still and showed no emotion or reaction. During the sentence reading, Thornberg remained silent. Even when the victims' families addressed him directly, begging for answers, he gave nothing back.
And you willfully filled your soul with the work of Satan by slaughtering our beloved for the pleasure in some gruesome manner.
The contrast was stark. A courtroom of people devastated by what they'd witnessed, and a defendant who appeared unmoved.
The execution of the sentence of death is division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice in Huntsville, Texas.
His own attorneys had called him a serial killer and a cannibal, but the prosecutor described him as pure evil. His silence in the courtroom spoke volumes. While the victims' families and the jury expected some reaction, he simply offered nothing. Whether this was defiance, dissociation, or simply the void where empathy should have been, we may never know. But while he may be cold and unfeeling on the inside, a killer who murdered a child felt differently about his own crimes. Kevin Ray Underwood. In December 19, 2024 in Oklahoma, Kevin Underwood spent his 45th birthday facing his final moments. 18 years earlier, he'd murdered his 10-year-old neighbor Jamie Rose Bolin.
Kevin Underwood, he got the death sentence for brutally murdering his 10-year-old neighbor back in 2006.
Nearly decapitating her in pursuit of cannibalistic fantasies he'd planned for months. On April 12, 2006, Kevin lured Jamie to his apartment after her return from school. He had intercepted her and promised to let her play with his pet rat. In his house, he put on the SpongeBob SquarePants show for her to watch, only for him to attack her from the back with a hit to her head. But the violence did not end there. In 20 minutes, Jamie was dead, after repeated blows to her head with a wooden cutting board and asphyxiation.
During Kevin Underwood's final appeals, they recounted how he brutally attacked and killed the 10-year-old girl.
While he thought he had gotten away with it, he was finally arrested after a sealed plastic tub containing Jamie's remains and her dismantled bike were found in his house. For the next 18 years, he spent going in and out of trial until the day he was sentenced to death. When it was announced, Kevin pleaded and begged for forgiveness. His execution was scheduled for the morning of his birthday, a detail that would haunt his final words.
Although I do not want to die, I recognize that I deserve to for what I did.
In his final moments, strapped to a gurney, Kevin apologized to Jamie's family and his own, wishing he could undo what he had done, but it was too late. At 10:14 a.m. on December 19, 2024, he was pronounced dead after a dose of lethal injection was injected into his body.
Today, child murderer Kevin Underwood will be put to death.
But while Kevin showed true remorse from the moment he was caught till his last moments, another child killer showed a reaction that almost felt like excitement after he was sentenced. Albert Fish. When Albert Fish stood before a White Plains courtroom in March 1935, the world held its breath, as for the verdict of a horrific killer.
Albert Fish's immediate family had a history of mental illness and alcoholism. Few of his relatives had perished in mental institutions.
The 66-year-old house painter had confessed to kidnapping 12-year-old Grace Budd, murdering her, and consuming her remains over 9 days. The jury deliberated his fate while psychiatrists debated whether his documented sadism and self-harm constituted legal insanity. But in the middle of all this, Albert's reaction revealed something chilling about his psyche. When he was found guilty of his crime and the verdict announced, there was momentary disappointment, replaced almost instantly by near elation. The death sentence didn't terrify him. The thought of dying, even by the electric chair, thrilled him. Here was a man who had embedded 29 needles into his own body, seeking pain as pleasure.
Fish had truly been inserting needles into his pelvic region for years. 27 needles lodged inside his body, just as he had claimed.
Even execution became another sensation to anticipate. On his death day on January 16, 1936, Albert went to the electric chair willingly, eagerly anticipating his own demise. His final moments embodied the irony that had defined his trial. A grandfather figure who committed monstrous acts, a man the jury believed was insane but deserved death anyway.
Fish's story and Fish himself seemed to be like the flesh and blood incarnation.
The electric chair claimed him at Sing Sing prison, ending a life that had redefined human depravity. But unlike Albert, another killer claimed innocence even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Alfred Packer.
Introducing the true and terrifying story of Alfred Packer.
The winter of 1874 left 5 men dead in Colorado's San Juan Mountains, and only Alfred Packer was alive. But when his constantly changing stories and the discovery of his companions' bodies led to his arrest, Alfred faced a frontier justice system eager for answers. His tale of surviving cannibalism after Shannon Bell allegedly killed the others in madness seemed plausible, until evidence suggested otherwise. On April 13, 1883, Alfred was found guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced to death by hanging. Legend claims the judge declared him a voracious man-eating criminal who had reduced the Democratic population of the county, though court records show the actual sentencing was far more conventional in its language. But what struck everyone as odd wasn't the colorful myth, but Alfred's silent acceptance. When his sentence was called out,
Packer and his companions were lost.
When Packer emerged from the mountains alone, looking very well fed,
he offered no dramatic outburst nor any emotional plea, just the stoic demeanor of a man who had already survived the unthinkable. His death sentence was overturned on a technicality. Colorado had been a territory, not a state, when the alleged crimes occurred. At his 1886 retrial in Gunnison, the jury convicted him of 5 counts of manslaughter and sentenced him to 40 years, then the longest custodial sentence in U.S. history. This time, Alfred maintained his innocence throughout, claiming self-defense and survival necessity. After serving 18 years, Denver Post reporter Polly Pry's articles questioning his guilt led to his parole in 1901. He lived quietly in Littleton, maintaining his innocence until his death in 1907, reportedly becoming a vegetarian. But while Alfred allegedly feasted on the flesh of his comrades, another killer from Sacramento consumed flesh and feasted on the blood of his victims too. Richard Trenton Chase.
You're going to press for capital punishment in this case?
That we've said from the beginning that we intend to ask for the death penalty. Nothing has happened that would cause us to change our intention about the death penalty.
He didn't just kill, he believed he had to. Convinced his blood was turning to powder and his body was disintegrating, this Sacramento man left 6 people dead in a month-long spree in late 1977 and early 1978. But the shocking part, he didn't just kill them, he drank their blood, consumed the body parts, and mutilated the corpses in ways that shocked even hardened detectives. The trial lasted 4 months, but the jury deliberated for only 5 hours. When the verdict came on May 8, 1979, Richard was found guilty of 6 counts of first-degree murder, with the jury rejecting his insanity defense and sentencing him to die in the gas chamber. During the trial, he sat shackled throughout, his delusions about Nazis, UFOs, and soap dish poisoning dismissed as insufficient to absolve him of responsibility. When given the opportunity to address the court, he simply said no in a barely audible voice. His silence spoke volumes. Either he remained trapped in his psychotic worldview or recognized the futility of explanation. But although he had been sentenced to death, Richard did not wait around for his own sentence to be carried out. He died by suicide on December 26, 1980, taking an overdose of medication he had stockpiled while on death row at San Quentin. His fellow inmates, aware of his crimes and frightened by him, had reportedly encouraged him to end his own life. Like a coward, he took the easy way out, a fate he did not give his victims. Daniel Rakowitz. He wandered New York's East Village with a Bible and a pet rooster, preaching his own religion and dealing marijuana. But when his roommate Monica Birrell disappeared in August 1989, Daniel didn't hide, he bragged. He told people in Tompkins Square Park that he had killed her, dismembered her body in their bathtub, and made soup from her remains.
Accused murderer Daniel Rakowitz became the centerpiece of evidence in a trial that was described by presiding Judge Robert M. Haft.
On February 22, 1991, a jury found the 31-year-old Rakowitz not guilty by reason of insanity. Unlike the others, there would be no prison cell, no death sentence. He was committed to the Kirby Forensic Psychiatric Center for the Criminally Insane on Ward's Island, where he has remained for over 3 decades. Psychiatric experts had diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, documenting a long history of untreated mental illness and delusional beliefs. As he sat in court and listened to his verdict, Daniel showed no dramatic reaction. His delusions about the CIA, his Church of Ni 66, and his belief that feeding Birrell's remains to the homeless was somehow a revolutionary act revealed a mind fundamentally disconnected from reality. Throughout subsequent hearings, he has consistently denied cooking the soup or feeding it to others, despite trial testimony suggesting otherwise. Presently, he continues to petition for transfer to less secure facilities, requests that prosecutors have successfully opposed for over 3 decades. Luca Rocco Magnotta. He craved fame above all else and wanted nothing more than to be famous. But after posting videos of himself killing kittens online, he escalated to the unthinkable. In May 2012, Luca murdered and dismembered Chinese student Jun Lin and mailed his hands and feet to elementary schools and federal political party offices.
Magnotta is accused of murdering and dismembering an international student studying at Concordia University.
The murder and the act of insolence were just the beginning. He filmed the killing and posted it online before fleeing Canada, triggering an international manhunt that ended with his capture in a Berlin internet cafe.
Uploading the video to the internet and then mailing the dismembered body parts to Canadian political leaders.
After a 12-week trial, the jury deliberated for 8 days before returning guilty verdicts on all charges on their 8th day. Luca closed his eyes and showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He received a mandatory life sentence with no possibility of parole for 25 years, plus 19 additional years for other charges. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Luca said no in a barely audible voice. His lawyer later described him as disappointed but relieved, and Lin's family lawyer noted that Luca missed his opportunity to express remorse or offer an apology. Sadly, Jun Lin's father had attended every day of testimony and deliberations, hoping for some acknowledgement of the pain inflicted, yet he received none.
But today's evidence would be too emotional. His father already left the courtroom in tears a couple of times last week.
In the end, Luca got the end he deserved, locked away from the world he had scarred. Allison Weaver. Not all cases of cannibalistic violence end in death, but for some it ends in broken friendship and trauma. On September 16, 2019, Allison Weaver attacked her friend in a Rochester Hills apartment in what the victim would describe as being like a horror movie. 47-year-old Allison bit and strangled her victim while believing she was a wolf, and her victim was a vampire.
Multiple bite marks all over the victim's body. The suspect says they were playing a game, vampire versus wolf.
The attack left the victim with permanent nerve damage, missing parts of her ear and face, and psychological scars that would never fully heal.
The officer stated that he could see that Jane was clearly very injured with a portion of her cheek and her ear missing.
At her sentencing on October 12, 2022, apologized to the victim and her family, saying she felt horrible about what happened and wished she could take it away. Yet her words rang hollow against the victim's powerful impact statement, describing pure evil in Allison's eyes. The judge called the attack an abomination, noting she had seen murder cases less violent in her 25 years on the bench. And despite the victim's plea for a harsher sentence,
of her demon eyes killing me, and the fact that she will try to do this again someday.
Allison received 10 to 15 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections and must register as a sex offender. The judge acknowledged the charges didn't reflect the true horror of what occurred, calling the sentence a gift compared to what could have been charged. But it was Allison's show of remorse that remained the highlight of the day. Unlike most killers, Allison's victim survived to face her in court, a final meeting that would haunt them both forever. Armin Meiwes. He was not driven by a sudden impulse to kill, but by a chilling, meticulously documented desire. In 2001, Armin posted an online advertisement seeking a voluntary victim to be killed and consumed. The response he got was not fake or staged, but an honest one from a willing participant. After both parties agreed, Armin met with Bernd Brandes, the victim, and killed and dismembered him. After consuming his body over the course of several months, Armin was finally arrested and charged in court.
In March 2001, he killed a man and ate him, along with a glass of fine red wine.
His crime was uniquely unsettling, consensual cannibalism, where the victim agreed to the act. But there was an even more unsettling fact at play. The act was recorded in graphic detail, providing the irrefutable evidence that led to his eventual capture. And the trial? a media spectacle that forced Germany's legal system to grapple with the complexities of complicity and intent.
In German law, it's a very difficult difference. Is whoever kills a human being out of murderous lust?
Initially, Armin was convicted of manslaughter, a decision that sparked outrage. However, prosecutors successfully appealed, arguing that the killing was for gratification, not on request. When the final verdict of the second trial was handed down in 2006, Armin showed little outward emotion. His reaction was a matter of unsettling quietude, a chilling contrast to the savagery of his act. He was described as pragmatic, accepting the finality of the sentence with the same methodical detachment he had shown in planning his crime. Cold, detached, and ruthless, a truly calculated individual accepting a calculated fate. Nikolai Dzhumagaliev. In the Soviet era of Kazakhstan, he earned the nickname Metal Fang, not for having an iron tooth, but for his exceptional dental work. But while he had honest work during the day, he terrorized the city at night. Between 1979 and 1980, Nikolai Dzhumagaliev committed a series of brutal murders that included acts of cannibalism. Yet, like all criminals, his undoing came not from a meticulous investigation, but from a gruesome accident.
His first murder he was planning for a couple of years. Dzhumagaliev was constantly seeing dismembered bodies of women in his dreams.
A party guest who stumbled upon human remains stored in his apartment. His capture was swift, but his trial in 1981 was anything but ordinary. It was shrouded in Soviet secrecy, deemed too sensitive and shocking for the public eye. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, he was found not guilty by reason of insanity, a sentence that effectively meant indeterminate confinement in a high-security psychiatric hospital. But when the verdict was read, Nikolai's reaction was reportedly one of almost smug defiance. He had evaded a firing squad, the common fate for mass murderers in the USSR. But this perceived victory was temporary. He escaped confinement twice over the years only to be recaptured, ensuring his life remained a perpetual state of incarceration and institutional scrutiny. His silence in court was perhaps the most frightening thing of all. A man who committed unspeakable acts, yet gave the court no genuine theatrical emotion to analyze, leaving only cold, hard fact, a physical representation of the turmoil within his mind. Joseph Oberhanssley. He was supposed to love and care for her, but when he stood trial, he was tried not just for her murder, but also for the mutilation of her corpse. For Joseph Oberhanssley, his appearance in court was not his first. His life was marked by escalating violence.
The hour, Joseph Oberhanssley has been found guilty of murder and burglary, and now, late today, the jury made their recommendation for his sentence.
All of which culminated when he killed his ex-girlfriend, Tammy Jo Blanton.
That was more than 6 years after Tammy Jo Blanton was found dead in her Jeffersonville home.
And consumed parts of her brain and heart. When her body was found in his possession, it was covered in mutilations. The evidence, including his own statements, was damning. The trial was fraught with legal delays and questions of competency. Finally, in 2020, when the jury delivered the final devastating sentence of death by lethal injection after 6 years, Joseph's response was volatile.
This was a day 6 years in the making, one the prosecutor said would always come. More on that in just a minute.
He feigned innocence, claiming that the act had been perpetrated by 2 black guys instead of himself. But in the face of such evidence, it was clear that there was no escape. Yet the questions linger. Does he truly believe his innocence, or is there more at play? Austin Harrouff. He had his whole life and future ahead of him, but one horrific act of violence and murder set him down on a path he can never forget.
On Austin Harrouff.
He's the teenager the sheriff claims violently attacked and murdered a Tequesta couple in their home.
In 2016, Austin Harrouff, a college student and athlete, attacked a couple seemingly at random, killing them both and attempting to eat the face of one victim. He was found covered in blood, growling, and making animalistic noises. The act, though shocking, showed a side of Austin no one had seen before, but the trial that followed was even more scary. His subsequent trial became a legal battle over competency and extreme intoxication. He claimed to have blacked out during the attack and did not remember attacking or killing anyone, but it was the confession of demonic influence that scarred everyone. Though initially facing the death penalty, the case eventually concluded with a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. And when the judge delivered the ruling in 2023, effectively condemning him to a mental health facility for life, Austin, who had spent years in institutional care, was reported to show a mixture of relief and dazed resignation. The justice system acknowledged the horrific act, but ultimately placed the person outside the realm of criminal culpability, a sentence that left many struggling for closure. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.